And it was in that context and situation that I first began to look around and become concerned with the social situation. I can truthfully say that up until that time that I was pretty jive in my outlook, and I was more concerned about pretty clothes and pretty cars and pretty girls than I was about what was going on in a larger context. But in 1954, the same year that the Supreme Court issued that decision, lower court in the state of California issued a decision that sent me to the penitentiary. And there's nothing like being sent to the penitentiary to make you wake up and start looking around and wonder what's going on. And when I began to look around to ask myself what's going on, I realized I didn't know what was going on. I understood the criminal activity that had gotten me in prison, but I didn't understand the larger context in which all this was taking place. And because of the violence that began to come into the civil rights movement that grew out of the Supreme Court decision, up until that time, it was very seldom that you read anything about black people in the newspapers.
Eldridge Cleaver, former militant leader and ex-Black Panther Party member, was the organization's Minister of Information. In 1968, Cleaver was involved in a shootout between Oakland police officers and members of the Black Panthers. To avoid charges of assault and attempted murder, Cleaver fled into exile for 7 years. In 1975, he returned to the United States to face the trial he jumped bail to avoid. In 1980, he was sentenced to probation and 2,000 hours of community service. Since his return, Cleaver has associated himself with many politically conservative and Christian movement causes. This week, Eldridge Cleaver in Black America.
From the Center for Telecommunication Services, the University of Texas at Austin, this is In Black America, discussions of the black experience in contemporary society. With this week's program, here's your producer and host, John Henson.
Former Black Panther leader Eldridge Cleaver came into prominence through the terrorist actions of the Black Panthers during the 1960s. Earlier in the 60s, Cleaver gained national acclaim for his book entitled Soul on Ice, written while serving a 9-year term in prison for rape. During his incarceration, he became a black Muslim and a follower of the late Malcolm X. After being in prison for 10 years, Cleaver fled the United States to avoid prosecution on an attempted murder charge stemming from a 1968 shootout with Oakland police officers and members of the Black Panthers. While in exile with his wife Kathleen, Eldridge stayed in several communist countries. Their son, now 13, was born in Algeria, and their 12-year-old daughter was born in North Korea. They also spent time in China, Cuba, France, and the Soviet Union. Also while abroad, Cleaver became a born-again Christian. In 1975, Cleaver returned to the United States to face charges he jumped bail to avoid in 1968. In 1980, a California Superior Court judge sentenced him to probation and 2,000 hours of community service. Since his return to the United States in 1975, Eldridge Cleaver has associated himself with many conservative and Christian movement causes. He has been lecturing on anti-Marxist philosophy and championing the ways of democracy. Cleaver, now 46, has toured the country, speaking at numerous rallies and meetings. I talked to Cleaver at one such rally and asked why he became a Black Panther.
Well, because I felt that it was time for people to stand up and be counted, to take a stand. And I joined the Black Panther Party 2 months after it was organized in December of 1966. And black people were being killed throughout America. We had the upheaval occasioned by the Civil Rights Movement. Watts, California had gone up in flames. There had been rebellions of black people throughout the country. And many black people were being killed, and we felt that there was a need to stand up and do something to try to stop that killing. The police departments were coming down very heavy against the black community, and the number one cry of black people became to get rid of police brutality. And so we took it as our dedication to try to deal with that.
What was your position within the Black Panther Party?
I was the Minister of Information of the Black Panther Party. I was the third-ranking person after Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. My job was to deal with the newspaper. I started the Black Panther newspaper and to prepare all of the educational materials and publications and so forth.
Why and when did you leave the United States?
I left because I was scheduled to go to San Quentin Prison. I had been involved in a gunfight with the Oakland Police Department. This happened on April the 6th of 1968, 2 days after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was really part of that reaction in the black community. It took the form of a gunfight in Oakland, and I was arrested the same night. I had gotten shot. Bobby Hutton, a member of the party, had gotten killed, and one other member of the party had gotten shot. 3 policemen also were shot. And I got out of prison on bail, and they were going to put me back in prison. So faced with that possibility, I left the United States.
Where did you go when you went in exile?
I went first to Canada, caught a boat to Cuba, stayed in Cuba for 8 months, then went to Algeria, lived there for 4 years, then went to France, lived there for 3 years.
Interesting question. Is it difficult for a person to get out of the United States if they so choose, secretly?
Not really. I think you just have to understand a little bit about how the border situation is and what kind of ID they expect you to have when you get there. For instance, I left here and I went to Canada, and to go into Canada, you don't need a passport. I had a phony driver's license with someone else's name on it and some collateral stuff like some mail that was addressed to that same name. And the problem of being a fugitive, though, is more complicated than just getting out into Canada or Mexico. To travel around the world, you need some real good paper. You need a passport that must be valid or have the appearance of being valid. They have some very sophisticated techniques for discovering false passports and so forth. So we had to become experts in these tactics of evasion. And one of the big problems that America has these days is that we don't have a system of identification in this country that is sophisticated. Each state relies on a driver's license, something like this, and that means the police on the border have to be familiar with 50 different forms of driver's license. And they rely on the hot list. If your name is not in the book being hot, then they have no way of dealing with it.
How did you finance living outside the United States?
Well, I had about $20,000 when I left here. But we had a large number of people with us in Algeria, for instance. This is where we set up our international section of the Black Panther Party. And at the height of our population there, we had 24 people that we had to take care of, and that's expensive. We had several houses that we had to pay rent on, etc. And we were able to more than meet our expenses by relying on some good old American know-how in various areas. Number one, we had a program that relied upon our friends in Europe, radicals in Europe. They would get automobiles from Germany and Holland and Belgium and bring them through France, put them on a ferry in Marseille, and we were able to get them into Algeria without paying any kind of duty because of our status there. Then we would make a new license plate for them and make some ownership papers and sell them. The reason this was possible is because Algerian people, if they want to bring a car in, they have to pay about 150% markup on taxes, and we would get them in without that expense. Consequently, we were able to sell them at a bargain since we hadn't paid anything for them in the first place. And this was one of our mainstays. Also, we had a program for falsifying passports and making entry and exit visas, and we would do this for a modest fee. And this was something that we used to do frequently. We had more of that to do than we cared to do, because in most of the world, you need a visa to get into a country and another visa to get out of a country. And so many people knew that we had some sophisticated technology for doing this in a foolproof manner, and so we often had people coming to us for this service.
What did you learn while you were in exile?
What did I learn?
Right.
Oh, come on, that's a broad question. First of all, I learned
We're dealing with communist countries, particularly.
Well, in terms of that level, when I left the United States, I was really dedicated to communism and the whole revolutionary movement that was aimed at destroying capitalism and getting rid of our form of government. And my experience in seeing what communism was all about and how it treated people, how people felt about the communist governments, this made me turn against communism because I'm struggling for a better world. I don't want to struggle and end up in a worse world. And I want freedom, and I want as much freedom as possible. And communism doesn't deliver that. And so after seeing that, for instance, Cuba used to say that racism is a product of capitalism, and that you get rid of capitalism, you get rid of racism. They claim to have eradicated racism in Cuba. And I went there looking to learn something about how to go about doing that, and I found out that that was a big lie, that they have racism in Cuba that takes you back to the last century here in America. And so it was this kind of experience of learning about the lies of communism and the reality of communism that made me recognize that the people all over the world are struggling to get rid of these dictatorships. They want democracy. People in communist countries want democracy. People in the third world countries want democracy. And since we already had democracy here, I felt that instead of throwing it out, what we need to do is to strengthen it and to broaden its use amongst the people. And the one thing I learned was that our problems in America are in an economic system. And our political system, I feel, is functional and viable, particularly since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, where many black people now hold political office. And I'm running for an office in Oakland myself, and I vote and participate. And I know that we have this open to us now. So I want to preserve our political system, but our economic system is where we're in a state of crisis. And these were how I reorganized my thinking. Also, becoming a father, I have two children, my son born in Algeria, my daughter born in North Korea. These children had a very profound effect on me spiritually and made me start seeing a larger reality, and I began to believe in God, and I became a Christian. And so this sort of changed. I used to be an atheist, and so I had changes on my political philosophy as well as in my spiritual life.
And when I got the idea of becoming a professional revolutionary, I recognized that I had been handicapped by the Christianity that I had been taught as a child. I felt that I had been brainwashed by all these ideas of turning the other cheek and loving your enemy. I wanted to kill my enemies, and I wanted to take their heads off and not turn my cheek. And so I began to try to root these principles out of my heart. And it was when I read the things written by Che Guevara that I finally accomplished that. I remember very clearly the day that I read where Che Guevara had said that in order to be a professional revolutionary, you had to become a cold, calculating, killing machine, able to slit a throat at the drop of a hat and to walk away without looking back. And I thought that that really summed it up, because when I looked out at America, I saw many throats that I felt needed to be slit, and I wanted to have the kind of character that would allow me to slit as many as I could. And so it was that kind of cultivation that I began to undertake with myself. And it was in December of 1966 that my parole date came around. I had spent basically 12 years behind the prison walls with a couple of months respite, but basically 2 years, a couple of months outside, and then 10 straight years behind the walls. And I think that being in prison at a time when the world is in a state of upheaval, and then reading Marxism, Leninism for the first time is the best kind of context for really going to the uttermost extreme in your approach to that ideology. And so it was that kind of context that I became a Marxist, and I was released from prison, and I went to San Francisco on parole. I was attracted to the San Francisco Bay Area because the University of California at Berkeley was located there, and this was one of the most uproarious campuses for the anti-war movement in the entire country. And also in the same county, Alameda County, Oakland, California was there, and this was the place where the black movement was quite strong, particularly in California, but it also set some examples for the rest of the country. And so when I went out into the free world, I began to look around for people to work with. I was looking for people who wanted to indulge in armed struggle, and I found the Black Panther Party one night that I went to a meeting in San Francisco where we were discussing security for the widow of Malcolm X. Sister Betty Shabazz, we had invited her to come to San Francisco to make a speech on the anniversary of the death, of the assassination of Malcolm X. And the question of how to protect her had come up, and someone said, well, we need to call Bobby Seale and Huey Newton from Oakland and let them come over here with their men, and they can deal with security. And so they were invited to come to the meeting the following week, and that meeting was the first time that I had laid eyes on the members of the Black Panther Party. And it was very inspiring to me to see them. When they walked in the room, each of them had a rifle, a shotgun, or a pistol, and some of them had pistols and rifles or shotguns. And they had on their black uniforms. And when I looked at them, I said, boy, these are the people that I want to hook up with. And I had only one disagreement with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, and that had to do with the name of the Black Panther Party. I felt like it was improper to use the name of an animal to be the official name of a political organization. I wanted to use the name that Malcolm X had given to his final attempt to organize black people, which was the Organization of Afro-American Unity. I wanted to have some historical continuity there, and I put up this argument with Huey and Bobby, and I told them that this was kind of a zoological approach to politics, to name a political organization after an animal. It was sort of as if you would name, say the Democrats would call themselves the Jackass Party, the Donkey Party. However appropriate that might be, still was not the correct approach, or the Republicans would call themselves the Elephant Party or something like that. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale were dogmatic and they wouldn't hear of it. And so I put my reservations on the shelf and I joined the Black Panther Party.
Coming back to the United States was a big decision on your part and also your family. Why did you make that decision to return to America?
Well, I was really uptight about being in France. I wasn't an expatriate in the sense, I didn't leave America because I wanted to go live in another country. I left America because I didn't want to go live in San Quentin State Prison. And after being out there for about 8 years, I really felt that time had run out on me, that I needed to get back. But I didn't come back until after the war was over in Vietnam, after Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew got busted. There was a different atmosphere I detected in America. Many black people elected to high office. In the state of California, we had a black lieutenant governor. A black man was elected mayor of California, mayor of Los Angeles, where I grew up. And I felt that the moment had come for me to come back. And I think I made the right choice at the right time. And having undergone a spiritual conversion, I had reliance upon God to see me through. And I felt that, first of all, see, I've been to penitentiary, and I stayed a long time, and I wasn't scared of jail. Like a lot of people, you mention jail, and they just, ooh. Well, to me, the worst thing about jail is just so boring. But I felt I could endure that, and I felt that there was enough at stake. I felt that if they didn't just shoot me when I walked in, that I'd get out of jail, and then I'd have some kind of future in this country.
You have a very strong wife that stands behind you. She's been with you throughout your turmoil. How did this decision affect her?
Well, she was glad, and one of the reasons that I made the decision was because I was concerned about the pressure that she was under and also my children. My wife was not a fugitive, I was a fugitive, and my children were beginning to become what we used to call French fried Negroes. They were reaching, well, you have a lot of brothers and sisters who left America and gone to France, and, you can tell what year almost they left. If they left in the 40s, it's, hey, daddy-o. If they left in the 50s, then everything is cool. You know what I mean, man? Yes, it's cool. If they left in the 60s, they want to tear everything down. So I saw how people got frozen in that time frame and your roots dry up. And one day, my children came home from school and they said, Daddy, don't talk to us in English anymore. It confuses us and it hurts our ears. Speak to us in French. And I didn't like that. I wanted my children to be Americans, and I wanted my son in particular to play football and not that kickball they play over there in France, some of that O.J. Simpson kind of football. That's what I wanted. And so these kind of pressures, worrying about the future of my family and feeling guilty, the fact that they were locked outside of their own country because of me, I felt that I had a responsibility to deal with that. And I tried every other way to come back. And I found my old friends didn't want me to come back, you know.
I wanted to ask you that. Did you find any adverse reactions from your friends here in America when you did return? Did they say you sold out?
See, Huey Newton was in Cuba at the time that I came back. And a lot of people, like Congressman Ron Dellums and these people, they were glad that the Black Panther Party had been destroyed because they had all been swept aside and grassroots leadership had come into being. And that was destroyed by the FBI and so forth. So they were happy that all these people had been gotten rid of. And so they didn't want any ghosts coming back from the past. They didn't want me to come back. They wouldn't help me come back. And I just refused to accept that. So I was willing to go to jail or anything in order to get back. So when I first came back, people, the Black Panther Party called a press conference, and I think they set the tone for what happened later on. They said that I was an FBI agent and a CIA agent, and they asked the black community to stay away from me and not to help me. Then the rest of the media just took that up and reprinted it all over the world. And from that time on, a lot of people was wondering whether I was an FBI agent. And
Did that hurt you?
It hurt my pride, I can tell you the truth, because I have a convict's pride. And the last thing in the penitentiary you want to be is a snitch or a punk, you know what I'm saying? So this used to really hurt me because I know a lot of people who didn't know me really believe that. When somebody would come up to me and say, yeah, man, you're an FBI agent, it used to blow me away. Anyway, when people saw that I was making my way through the court system and being successful, then here come Huey back from Cuba. Abby Hoffman and all these people started surfacing. And it's interesting to me that Bernadine Dorn and all these people, they surrendered, and no one's called them all this name, but I think that they followed my example, and I don't mind that because I don't mind being a trailblazer even on that level. And I saw that this was the move to make, and I feel that if you're involved in rebellion in a formal sense that we weren't just criminals who were fugitives after committing some petty crime. We were involved in a political rebellion. It was very formal, and I felt that it was a dignified way to resolve it was through the process of surrender, and I did it in that manner, and I must say that I'm really glad the way that it came out.
Since you've been back here in the United States, what are some of the organizations and functions you've been involved with?
Well, I haven't joined any organizations, but I've been in contact with many, and primarily religious organizations. Because of my conversion, a lot of people have wanted to hear my testimony, so I've been speaking around in churches, and I've had a good reception on college campuses, and this is one of the things that I love to do is to talk to college students.
Why did you write the book Soul on Ice?
I wrote that primarily to confront myself and to get these things that were just really churning inside of me, begging for expression out of me. And I used to blow a tenor saxophone, and I was torn between music and words, you know. And I really felt that in the kind of upheaval that America was going through, that if I just cut off and became a musician, someday they'd come and take me away, and I wouldn't even know why. And so I put my horn down, and I decided to become a writer. And I did that because I felt that I understood some things about the world and about America that could be helpful to other people. And so I took a shot at it, and I think I made the right decision.
You plan on writing any more books or short stories?
I have a book coming out next year, which I call Soul Online, and I'm analyzing the problems that I think we're faced with here in the 80s and into the 90s.
Eldridge Cleaver, former militant leader and ex-Black Panther. If you have a comment or would like to purchase a cassette copy of this program, write us.